Velric Dune vanished without a trace on a quiet September evening, just hours after locking up the abandoned Farris Carnival, where he worked as a nighttime guide. Lorvan Creed, the elderly caretaker no one truly knew, claimed he hadn't seen or heard anything unusual. But beneath the rusting skeleton of the once famous Farris Wheel, a secret waited in silence. One that would unravel a decade-long string of disappearances, expose a hidden chamber of horrors, and reveal that the town of Rainswell had been harboring a predator far more calculating than anyone could have imagined. September 3, 2021 began like any other late summer evening in Rainswell, Colorado. The sun set behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the abandoned Farris Carnival grounds. The place hadn't operated in over 2 decades, yet it remained a strange attraction for tourists drawn by ghost stories and urban legends. The centerpiece of the grounds, the Farris Wheel, stood like a rusted skeleton, unmoving and half swallowed by creeping vines. Local guides would occasionally lead night tours through the site for thrill seekers, using flashlights and old photos to bring the carnival's haunted history to life. One of those guides was Velric Dune, a 27-year-old known for his calm presence and fascination with forgotten places. Velric had worked for the tour company for nearly 2 years and was well liked by visitors and staff alike. He was punctual, always prepared, and had an odd talent for storytelling that made his tours stand out. On the night he disappeared, Velric had been scheduled to lead a small group through the carnival. But when the group canceled last minute, he decided to stay behind and explore the grounds alone. He had told a coworker earlier that week he wanted to map out a new route to impress the Halloween crowds that were expected the following month. He parked his small silver sedan near the rusted ticket booth at around 7:40 p.m., according to CCTV footage from a nearby bait shop. That would be the last time anyone saw him alive. The next morning, Velric didn't return home. His roommate, a nurse named Lena Joel, contacted his workplace after failing to reach him. The tour company assumed he had simply stayed out late, but when his car was found still parked outside the carnival that afternoon, with the driver's side door unlocked and keys on the front seat, concern turned to fear. Inside the vehicle were Velric's backpack, a thermos of coffee, and his phone. Battery dead, screen cracked. His flashlight was later discovered at the base of the Farris Wheel facing upward. It was still operational. The Rainswell Police Department responded quickly. They sealed off the carnival grounds and brought in a search team with K9 units. Volunteers from the town joined the effort, combing through the field of rotting stalls, collapsing rides, and overgrown trails that surrounded the property. Drones were used to scan from above, while teams scoured the ground for signs of a struggle. But there was nothing. No blood, no torn clothing, no drag marks. By the end of the 3rd day, police had officially declared Velric Dune a missing person. Flyers went up across the county. His photo, a candid shot with him laughing under a canopy of string lights, appeared on social media pages and news broadcasts. The story caught attention statewide. How could someone simply vanish in a place that hadn't operated for 20 years? As the investigation expanded, locals began coming forward with strange reports. One woman claimed to have heard music playing from the carnival late at night, even though there was no power to the rides. Another man said he saw movement at the top of the Farris Wheel 2 nights after Velric vanished, though when police inspected it, the wheel was rusted solid. These stories were dismissed as hallucinations or attention-seeking, but they added to the growing unease around the case. What disturbed investigators most was the complete lack of electronic activity from Velric after 8 p.m. the night he disappeared. His phone had not sent a single ping to any nearby towers. There was no GPS movement, no social media use, not even a Bluetooth signal. It was as though something, or someone, had shut him off from the world the moment he stepped past the rusted gates. As days turned into weeks, the Farris Carnival was transformed from a forgotten curiosity into the center of a deeply unsettling mystery. Beneath the surface of this small, quiet town, whispers began to grow. Whispers about old secrets buried under rotting wood and rusting metal. Whispers about what really happened the night Velric Dune walked into the dark and never came back. Would you like me to expand Chapter 2 next? 2 weeks after Velric Dune's disappearance, the investigation shifted from frantic searching to quiet suspicion. With no signs of foul play on the surface, detectives began looking into the ownership of the Farris Carnival grounds. The property, though abandoned and deteriorating, still legally belonged to Emmerich Farris, the last living member of the once famous Farris family. The Farris name had once been associated with joy, laughter, and color, operating amusement parks all across the western United States. But the fall came quickly, and it was steep. In 2002, tragedy struck one of the family's major parks in California when a fire broke out in the funhouse during a crowded weekend afternoon. 3 children died in the blaze, and an investigation revealed numerous safety violations. Though Emmerich Farris denied responsibility and was never formally charged, his reputation was destroyed. He vanished from public view shortly after selling off several of his properties, including the park in Rainswell. That location, unlike the others, was never demolished or redeveloped. It simply sat in silence, rotting behind a locked gate, as news of Velric's disappearance spread. Emmerich's name began to reappear in town gossip. Detectives decided to speak with him directly. On October 1st, 2 investigators visited the Farris estate, an aging manor at the edge of Rainswell, shielded from view by tall pines and rusting iron gates. They were greeted not by Emmerich, but by a man who identified himself as Lorvan Creed, his live-in caretaker. Lorvan told them that Emmerich was gravely ill and rarely left his bed. According to him, the former amusement tycoon suffered from advanced neuromuscular disease and had not visited the carnival grounds in over 10 years. Still, the officers asked to speak to Emmerich briefly. Lorvan returned a few minutes later and told them that Emmerich was resting and not well enough for visitors. The detectives left without pushing further, but their curiosity deepened. Back at the station, they began digging into utility records for the Farris property. What they found was odd. While water and gas usage were nearly non-existent, expected for an abandoned site, the electrical records told a different story. For over a year, electricity had been flowing into the carnival grounds in irregular but consistent bursts. Late at night, primarily between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., the records showed spikes. Someone had been using power. At first, the team suspected vandals or trespassers, but security footage from a single road camera facing the carnival gate showed no signs of outside visitors. Every time those power spikes occurred, no one entered or exited. Investigators then reviewed Velric Dune's work schedule. What they found made their skin crawl. The spikes in power usage at the carnival grounds lined up almost exactly with the nights Velric had been assigned tours. Lights had been flickering on during the hours he was alone inside. Someone, or something, had been watching him. With a search warrant approved, detectives returned to the Farris estate. This time, they were determined to see Emmerich. Lorvan attempted to block their path, but they entered the house anyway. The air inside was heavy with dust and silence. They found Emmerich in a dim room on the 2nd floor, reclined in a bed surrounded by medical equipment. He appeared frail, almost skeletal, barely able to speak. Still, he managed to confirm his identity. When questioned, Emmerich denied having any knowledge of Velric Dune's disappearance. He claimed not to have authorized any use of power to the carnival site and insisted he hadn't even set foot on the property in over a decade. The detectives didn't press further that day, but they left convinced there was more to Emmerich's story than he admitted. Outside, as they walked past the overgrown garden, one of the officers noticed something unusual on the caretaker's truck parked in the driveway. On the bumper was a faded sticker with the Farris Carnival logo, the same logo that had been removed from town signage years ago. It was pristine, well-preserved, like it had been applied recently. A minor detail, perhaps, but in a case already built on strange gaps and gut feelings, it carried weight. Back at the station, investigators placed Emmerich Farris and Lorvin Creed under quiet surveillance. If either man had something to hide, they would soon reveal it. As officers reviewed historical records of missing persons in Rainswell and surrounding counties, they began to notice a pattern. The Farris Carnival was always nearby. And Velric Dune might not have been its first victim. Would you like Chapter 3 expanded next? On October 9th, 36 days after Velric Dune disappeared, a breakthrough came not from law enforcement, but from a young hiker named Jenna Reeve. Jenna had taken a weekend trip with her dog into the forested hills just outside of Rainswell. The trails were quiet and forgotten, winding through thickets that bordered the northern edge of the old Farris Carnival grounds. She wasn't looking for anything unusual, just a peaceful walk. But as her dog darted off the trail and began barking at something near the edge of a narrow ravine, Jenna followed. What she found would shake the entire investigation. Below a rocky ledge, half covered in fallen leaves and dirt, were bones. Human bones. Jenna called 911, her voice shaking as she described what she had seen. Police arrived within an hour, cordoning off the area and recovering the remains with the help of a forensic team. The bones were fragile, weathered, but not old enough to have been there for more than a few weeks. A scrap of dark clothing was also recovered, matching the jacket Velric Dune had been wearing the night he vanished. Dental records confirmed what investigators feared. The remains were indeed Velric's. But as the forensic report was completed, a disturbing revelation surfaced. Velric hadn't been dead for long. The coroner estimated the time of death to be only 3 to 4 days before the discovery, meaning he had been alive for over a month after he disappeared. The bones showed no obvious signs of blunt force trauma, stabbing, or gunshot wounds, no broken fingers, no ligature marks. He had not fought back. There were no drugs in his system either. To detectives, the implications were horrifying. Someone had kept Velric alive, somewhere, and then disposed of his body when they felt the investigation had gone cold. That changed everything. They were no longer looking for a killer who struck quickly and left. They were chasing someone methodical, patient, and possibly experienced. The location of the body was odd as well. The ravine was less than 2 miles from the carnival, yet search teams had passed near that area several times. It appeared as though the remains had been placed there recently, carefully staged in a way that avoided detection from the main trails. This wasn't a panic dump. It was deliberate. Detectives expanded their interviews, re-questioning anyone who had worked with Velric. One of those individuals was Corlin Meyer, a fellow tour guide who had shared overlapping shifts with Velric in the weeks before his disappearance. Corlin had initially offered little helpful information, but upon learning about the discovery of Velric's body, he reached out to investigators and revealed something strange. Corlin claimed that in their last week working together, Velric had become obsessed with an old blueprint of the carnival grounds. He had found the document inside a broken filing cabinet in the storage shed. It showed a staircase beneath the Farris Wheel, something that no longer existed. Velric had told Corlin he planned to investigate it alone on one of his off nights. Corlin dismissed it at the time, assuming Velric was just chasing ghosts, but now he wasn't so sure. Police returned to the Farris Wheel with ground-penetrating radar and discovered subtle disturbances beneath the earth. Something had definitely been altered. When they began digging, they uncovered a thick steel hatch, bolted shut and covered with a concrete slab. It took hours to remove, but when they finally opened it, the smell of old, stagnant air poured out. A spiral staircase, metal and rusted, led down into darkness. At the bottom of the staircase was a concrete chamber. No windows, no natural light. The room was sealed off from the world, soundproof and invisible from above. What the team found inside would haunt them forever. Along the walls were chains bolted into the cement, a cot with a stained mattress, and a table stacked with notebooks, VHS tapes, and labeling materials. Surveillance monitors sat in one corner, though they had no current feed. The entire space felt like a holding cell. On the floor, written in faded red chalk, was a name: Velric. Investigators now had proof that Velric had been held captive, trapped beneath the very structure he once used as part of his tours. His death hadn't been random or accidental. It had been planned, managed, and concealed. For weeks, the evidence suggested that whoever was behind this had done it before, and Velric Dune might not have been their only victim. Would you like Chapter 4 expanded next? The discovery of the underground chamber beneath the Farris Wheel changed the tone of the investigation entirely. What began as a missing person case had now morphed into something darker, an orchestrated system of abduction, surveillance, and, likely, murder. The room was a secret prison, buried under a forgotten carnival, and investigators believed it had been used more than once. The worn mattress, the multiple chains, and the stack of VHS tapes suggested that Velric Dune might have been only one name in a line of victims. Now the task was to identify the others. Detectives began with the notebooks found in the chamber. They were filled with precise clinical entries. Each page documented different subjects, some identified only by initials. Notes detailed sleep cycles, reactions to noise, food refusal, and eventual deactivation. Nowhere in the pages did the writer express emotion, empathy, or guilt. Whoever wrote them had treated the victims as experiments, objects, not people. One entry mentioned Subject VD resisted silence, showed signs of unraveling by day 29, removed accordingly. Investigators concluded that VD could only mean Velric Dune. In addition to the notebooks, the VHS tapes were sent to a digital forensics lab for analysis. Their contents were disturbing beyond anything the team had anticipated. Grainy, black and white. Footage showed victims inside the chamber, sitting alone, chained to the walls. Day after day, some screamed. Some sat in eerie stillness. Some seemed to talk to themselves for hours. The footage had no sound, but the psychological torment was undeniable. The tapes were time-stamped, some dating back as far as 2012. There were more than 20 labeled sequences, more victims than anyone had guessed. None of these missing persons had ever been connected before. They were mostly drifters, travelers, people passing through town who had been reported missing but never linked to Rainswell. Police opened cold case files across 4 states and began compiling a list. Every entry led back to a similar point: the Farris Carnival. Even long after it had closed, its presence lingered like a scar across the countryside. Attention once again turned to Emeric Farris and his elusive caretaker, Lorvan Creed. When questioned a second time, Lorvan remained cool and vague. He claimed he had never been to the carnival since its closure and had no idea what existed beneath the Farris Wheel. Investigators didn't believe him, but they still lacked enough to arrest him. Emeric, now visibly weaker and barely responsive, was transferred to a private hospital under police watch. Detectives suspected that he either knew everything or was the mastermind himself. Then came a shocking twist. Fingerprint analysis from the chamber turned up a match, not for Lorvan Creed or Emeric Farris, but for a man named Bront Callan, a former engineer who once worked on the Farris Carnival's infrastructure in the late 1990s. Bront had vanished in 2006 after being questioned in a different criminal case involving surveillance devices placed inside public restrooms at another amusement park. He was never arrested and was believed to have fled the state. A closer look at Lorvan Creed's identity uncovered something disturbing. His name, social security number, and even birth certificate had been falsified. Lorvan Creed was Bront Callan, living under a new identity. He had embedded himself within Emeric Farris's life as a caretaker, all while hiding in plain sight and maintaining control of the carnival grounds through back channels. Police moved quickly. They raided the Farris estate, arrested Bront Callan, and searched every room of the house. In a locked upstairs bedroom, they found a wall covered in sketches, crude drawings of the underground chamber, of the carnival layout, and disturbing diagrams of restraint devices. Hidden under the floorboards were dozens of videotapes labeled with dates and victim codes. Under intense interrogation, Bront Callan remained mostly silent. When asked about Velric Dune, he offered only a single sentence. He looked too deeply where others just wandered. No remorse, no emotion, just confirmation. The town of Rainswell recoiled in horror. They had unknowingly hosted a predator for decades. With Bront Callan in custody, investigators hoped they had ended the string of disappearances. But, unanswered, questions remained, chief among them. How much did Emeric Farris really know? And was Bront truly acting alone? Would you like Chapter 5 expanded next? The arrest of Bront Callan, formerly known as Lor Van Creed, was a victory for law enforcement. But the case was far from over. With 24 possible victims linked to the underground chamber beneath the Farris Wheel, the investigation turned toward the final missing pieces: motive, collaborators, and the role of Emeric Farris. Bront's silence made things harder. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, he refused to explain how he had operated for so long, or why he had kept his victims alive for weeks before killing them. Inside the chamber, forensics uncovered a critical clue that had gone unnoticed during the first sweep. Behind a loose panel on the far wall was a hidden compartment containing several film reels, each marked with a single initial. These reels were not surveillance footage, but carefully edited videos, cut, scored with faint music, and spliced together like macabre documentaries. Each one followed a victim's progression from arrival to breakdown. The cinematography was chilling. It was not just documentation, it was art, in the darkest sense. Investigators theorized that Bront Callan wasn't merely a sadist, he was obsessed with control and decay. His work had the tone of a psychological experiment layered with theatrical intent. It was discovered that some of these films had been quietly mailed to obscure film festivals under a fake name as experimental art. 2 had even been screened publicly under the title Human Silence, with no one realizing what they were actually watching. The implications were horrifying. As these revelations unfolded, Emeric Farris's condition worsened. Doctors confirmed he had late-stage ALS and was not expected to survive the year. With time running out, detectives made one final attempt to speak with him. This time, Emeric agreed. In a brief recorded interview, his voice thin and fading, he gave a partial confession, not of direct involvement, but of knowledge. He admitted that Bront had approached him years earlier with promises to preserve the legacy of the Farris Carnival. Emeric claimed he didn't know what Bront had intended at first, but had turned a blind eye once it became clear something was wrong. He said he feared exposure, feared the total destruction of the Farris name. So he allowed Bront to live on the estate and maintain the carnival grounds, while Emeric withdrew from public life. He never entered the carnival again, but he received regular payments, money Bront somehow earned through anonymous film, sales and untraceable cryptocurrency accounts. In return, Emeric signed over access and gave Bront full control, never asking questions. In the end, he said one thing that stuck with investigators. "I built the stage. I didn't choose the actors." The statement wasn't enough to charge Emeric with a crime, but it cemented his moral guilt. Weeks later, he passed away in his hospital bed, alone and largely unmourned. The town of Rainswell quietly removed the last remaining Farris signs from public view. A motion was passed to demolish the carnival grounds entirely. As workers prepared to tear down the rusting rides and broken attractions, one final discovery was made beneath the tunnel of mirrors. Buried under a collapsed portion of flooring was a second chamber, smaller, simpler, but with the same layout as the first. A single set of chains, a broken camera mount, and on the wall, written in red wax, You only found the ones I wanted you to find. This message shattered the assumption that the investigation was over. It hinted that some victims had been completely erased, never recorded, never documented. Bront Callan had crafted a narrative, choosing which horrors to reveal and which to hide. The final count of victims might never be known. Bront was sentenced to multiple life terms without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion during the trial, watching calmly as footage of his secret films was played before a stunned courtroom. Survivors of the victims wept openly. Jurors struggled to meet his eyes. When asked if he had any final statement, Bront said nothing. The Farris Carnival was reduced to rubble within a month. A memorial now stands at the site, listing the known names of the lost. But under that quiet soil, suspicion lingers. Not every answer was uncovered, not every secret unburied, and the legend of the Farris Wheel continues to cast its shadow over Rainswell, a spinning monument to the silence no one saw coming. Would you like me to compile the full story into a formatted script or documentary voiceover?